I never imagined Christmas would end in a bank conference room with my wife whispering, "No, no, that can't be." And my stepdaughter staring at me like she'd finally realized I wasn't the idiot she'd always taken me for. The room was dead silent, not the calm kind, the kind where you hear your own pulse pounding in your ears. And all I'd done was sit there, hands folded, and let the paperwork do the talking. But that came later. What really started it, was a dinner invitation on Christmas night. Christmas in Omaha is usually predictable. Snow packed tight along the curbs, salt crunching under your boots, the radio cycling the same songs about homecomings and warmth. I spent most of that day alone in our split-level house on the west side, watching a football game with the sound off and pretending I didn't mind the quiet. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A text from my stepdaughter, Melissa. "Dinner tonight, 7:30, Lato Steakhouse. Dress nice. No Merry Christmas." No emoji. Just that. Lato wasn't a place you went casually. White tablecloths, valet parking, the kind of restaurant where the sides cost extra, and the waiter calls you sir while already scanning the room for someone more important. I hesitated before replying. Melissa and I had never been close. She was 38, sharp-tongued, and carried herself like the world owed her interest. Still, Christmas was Christmas. Family showed up. That was the rule. "See you there," I typed. I showered, shaved, and put on my navy blazer. The one Diane always said made me look respectable. That word stuck with me as I brushed snow off the windshield and drove downtown. Respectable, not loved, not wanted, just tolerated. The valet took my keys without meeting my eyes. Inside, the air smelled of seared steak and expensive wine. Warm, loud, alive. I spotted them immediately. Diane sat at the center of the table, laughing too loudly, one hand wrapped around a wineglass. Her father Ray was beside her, red-faced and cheerful, fork resting on an empty plate. Melissa leaned back in her chair, scrolling on her phone, smiling at something on the screen. Every plate was empty, every glass half drained. They'd already eaten. I stood there for a moment, coat still on, feeling like I'd walked into the wrong scene halfway through the movie. Melissa noticed me first. "Oh," she said, loud enough to draw a few glances. "You made it." I pulled out a chair. "Looks like I missed dinner." She shrugged, a corner of her mouth lifting. "Yeah, about that." She slid a black leather folder across the table. "Wrong time. My mistake. But you can still join us." Diane snorted into her wine. Ray laughed, deep and satisfied. "That's a good one," he said. Melissa tapped the folder. "You can join by paying." I opened it. 4 figures stared back at me. Steak, lobster tails, a bottle of red I recognized from the wine list. Over $400. Heat climbed my neck. The waiter hovered nearby, pretending not to watch. Watching anyway. Diane's eyes glittered. "Don't be so sensitive," she said. "It's Christmas." Something settled in my chest then. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. For 14 years, I'd handled the numbers, the taxes, insurance renewals, late notices that never made it to the table. I fixed things quietly so no one else had to think about them. And now I was standing in a room full of people who thought that was my purpose. I closed the folder slowly. Melissa tilted her head, so I smiled. "You're right," I said. "It's time we settled the accounts." They laughed harder. Diane shook her head like I'd told a bad joke. Ray raised his glass. I paid the bill. Every cent. Then I wished them a pleasant evening and walked out into the cold. The air slapped my face awake. Snow drifted under the streetlights. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, hand steady on the wheel. At home, I hung my coat and went straight to the hallway closet, the one only I ever opened. I pulled down a dusty file box, set it on the kitchen table, and lifted the lid. Folders, statements, printed emails kept, just in case. And there it was, my name on a document I had never signed, yet was legally attached to. I exhaled slowly. Dinner wasn't the worst thing they'd done, not even close. For a long time, I sat there staring at my own name like it belonged to someone else. Frank Halverson, Omaha, Nebraska, 61, semi-retired, responsible, reliable, invisible. The house had that hollow quiet it gets after the holidays, decorations still up, energy gone. White lights blinked in the dark window over the sink. The football game I'd left on earlier had long since ended. I picked up the document again and read it carefully. It was tied to Ray's so-called family trust, an LLC he loved to brag about at church and barbecues. According to the paperwork, I wasn't just helping anymore. I was listed as a secondary guarantor on a line of credit. No conversation. No signature. Just my name, neat and typed, like I'd volunteered. I wasn't shocked. That's the part people don't understand. When you've been taken advantage of for years, the proof doesn't explode, it seeps in. Quiet and cold, like water in your boots. For 14 years, Diane handled appearances. I handled reality. I stayed up late every April. W-2 South and 1099s spread across this same table, making sure Ray didn't trigger an audit. I called the HOA when Melissa forgot to pay her dues. I renewed policies, negotiated payment plans, smoothed overdrafts before anyone noticed. Nobody asked me to stop. Nobody said thank you. I found an old email thread from 3 years back. Melissa. He's freaking out over the bank again. Diane, relax. He's just the bean counter. He'll handle it. Bean counter. I laughed once, short and humorless. Seeing it in print, knowing they'd said it when they thought I wasn't listening, landed harder than it should have. The next morning, Diane moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened. You left early, she said, pouring coffee. I was tired. Melissa didn't mean anything by it. You know how she is. I did. I folded the newspaper and didn't mention the file box in the closet. She didn't ask why I was quieter than usual. She was used to that afternoon. I sat in my truck outside the grocery store, heat running, engine off. I watched people load bag skids tugging sleeves, couples arguing gently over forgotten items. Normal life. My phone buzzed. A group text from Melissa. Bank keeps emailing Dad. Anyone know why they're being so annoying? Ray replied with a laughing emoji. Diane added, probably Frank being cautious again. Cautious? That night, I pulled the file box out once more. I made coffee, sat down, and laid everything out: dates, numbers, names. This wasn't anger. It was clarity. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not yet. I just needed to make sure I didn't go down with them. Because if that trust collapsed, that credit line got called, it wouldn't be Ray or Melissa paying first, it would be me. I found another document. At the bottom of the stack, an old authorization form, scanned and reused. My name had been typed into a field that looked too familiar. My jaw tightened. This wasn't help anymore. This was exploitation. I pushed back from the table and stood there, listening to the refrigerator hum and the steady tick of the clock. 14 years of being agreeable had led me here. I returned the files to the box and slid it back onto the closet shelf, but not all the way to the back. This time, I wanted it within reach. As I turned off the kitchen light, a single thought settled in my mind, solid and undeniable. They thought I was useful because I stayed silent. They were about to learn what happened when I didn't. The letter arrived Monday morning, tucked between a grocery flyer and a church bulletin I hadn't asked for. A white envelope, government return address. My stomach tightened before I opened it. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd balanced everyone else's messes for years. Slid my finger under the flap. The paper inside was crisp, official, impersonal, Internal Revenue Service. Request for verification. Possible audit pending. The words didn't threaten. They didn't need to. I read it twice, then a third time. It referenced the trust, the line of credit, my name. I leaned back and closed my eyes. This was the part no one warned you about when you spent a lifetime being responsible. When things went right, you were invisible. When they went wrong, your name was already attached. My chest felt tight, not pain. Exactly, pressure. I poured a glass of water and stared out the window until my breathing steadied. The snow from Christmas night had melted into gray slush along the curb. The holidays were officially over. That afternoon, I drove to my doctor's office on Dodge Street. I told myself it was routine. Blood pressure's a little high, she said, removing the cuff. Stress. Family, I said. She nodded like she'd heard it all before. Try not to carry everything alone. If only it worked that way. That evening, I called an old colleague, Tom Reynolds, CPA. We'd worked together years ago before he moved to Lincoln. Frank, he said, distracted. I don't touch family situations anymore. Learned that lesson the hard way. I understand, I said, and I did. After I hung up, the silence in the house felt heavier. Diane came home late. Coat dusted with snow, cheeks flushed from cold or wine. She glanced at me. You're quiet. I got a letter. She sighed before I finished. If this is about dinner, it's from the IRS. That stopped her. What do you mean, from the IRS? I slid it across the table. She skimmed it, frowned, then pushed it back. This doesn't mean anything. Ray deals with this all the time. My name is on it. She waved a hand. You're overreacting. You always do this, getting worked up like an old man over paperwork. Old man, I'm 61, I said quietly, not incompetent. She stood, irritated. I don't have the energy for this. It was one dinner. One joke. Don't turn it into drama. She went upstairs and shut the door. I stayed at the table long after the house went dark. That was the night. I stopped hoping things would fix themselves. The next morning, I made 2 appointments, one with an estate attorney downtown, one with a compliance officer at my bank. Both meetings were calm, professional, sobering. Susan Klein, the attorney, read the documents carefully. You didn't sign this? No, but your name was authorized elsewhere enough to expose you to liability. How bad? If the trust defaults, you could lose assets, credit, retirement. What do I do? You disengage immediately and document everything. The banker didn't mince words. You should have been removed months ago. Someone benefited from keeping you attached. I thought of Melissa's text. He'll handle it. That night, I sat in the dark living room, watching fresh snowfall. I thought about the man I'd tried to be, steady, patient, agreeable, and the man that had turned me into. It wasn't anger that moved me forward, it was fear, clear, focused fear. I signed the first withdrawal notice the next morning. My hand shook slightly. When it was done, something eased inside me, not relief. Resolve. Emails stopped arriving. Bank alerts rerouted. Documents no longer landed quietly in my inbox. The silence was immediate and loud. I began waking before dawn. Coffee brewing while the house slept. I sat up at the dining table with my laptop, a legal pad, and the file box pulled fully into the light. This wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. Dates, names, authorizations. Every place my name appeared where it shouldn't. For the first time in years, I wasn't cleaning up someone else's mess. I was drawing a line. Around noon Wednesday, my phone buzzed. Melissa, Dad says the bank's asking weird questions. Did you talk to them? I set the phone face down. An hour later, Diane called. Frank, what's going on? Ray's stressed. The bank wants paperwork we already gave them. I'm sure they do. You sound distant. I am. Why are you doing this now? I thought of the restaurant, the empty plates, the bill sliding across the table. Because now it matters. That evening, the group chat lit up with jokes. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent formal notices, certified mail, clean language, no accusations. I resigned as an authorized signer, requested documentation, notified the bank I would no longer guarantee any obligations tied to the trust. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but because part of me still wanted to be liked. That part didn't get a vote anymore. Late that night, Diane came downstairs. You're different, she said. I know. Are you trying to punish us? I'm trying not to drown. She nodded once and went back upstairs. The next morning, an email arrived from the bank. Meeting requested. Purpose, clarification of trust obligations, and guarantor status. They wanted everyone present. I forwarded it to Diane, to Ray, to Melissa. No commentary. Melissa replied first. Is this really necessary? Ray followed. We can clear this up quietly. I stared at the screen. Quiet was no longer an option. Diane didn't text. She called. Frank, she said, a little breathless. This feels extreme. It's a meeting, I said. Nothing more. A pause. You'll be there? Yes. Another pause. Okay. When the call ended, I leaned back in my chair. They thought this was an inconvenience, a delay they could talk their way through like everything else. They didn't realize the ground had already shifted. When I accepted the calendar invite, my hands were steady. To them, it was just another meeting. To me, it was the reckoning. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. In the corner stood a small artificial Christmas tree. One strand of white lights still blinking like it hadn't gotten the memo that the holidays were over. Monday morning, gray sky. Omaha at its most honest. I arrived 10 minutes early and took the seat closest to the door. Old habit, I liked knowing where the exit was. Diane came in next. Heels clicking too fast for someone pretending to be calm. She gave me a tight smile and sat across from me, purse clutched in her lap like a shield. Ray and Melissa swept in together a few minutes later, loud and confident, like this was just another nuisance they'd smooth over. Ray slapped my shoulder as he passed. Morning, Frank. Didn't have to turn this into a federal case. Melissa smirked. Banks love paperwork. You of all people should know that. I nodded once, said nothing. The banker arrived first mid-40s, neat haircut, nameplate reading, Mark Evans, compliance officer. Right behind him came a woman in a charcoal suit, carrying a slim briefcase. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Susan Klein, counsel for Mr. Halverson." The room shifted. Melissa's smile flickered. Ray blinked. Diane turned toward me. Surprise, giving way to something closer to realization. Susan sat beside me and opened her folder. Mark cleared his throat. "We've called this meeting to clarify obligations related to the Halverson Family Trust and its associated lines of credit." Ray leaned back. "We've already covered this." "Yes," Mark said evenly, "but circumstances have changed." He slid a document across the table, not to Ray, but to me. Double quotes, "Mr. Halverson submitted formal withdrawal notices 30 days ago. Effective immediately, he is no longer an authorized signer, guarantor, or fiduciary related to the trust." The silence was instant. Diane's grip tightened on her purse. Melissa leaned forward. "That's not possible." Susan spoke calmly. "It is. All notices were properly filed and acknowledged." Ray frowned. "Frank wouldn't do that without talking to us." I met his eyes. "I tried." Mark continued. "This withdrawal triggered a review. During that process, several irregularities were identified." Melissa crossed her arms. "Irregularities, unauthorized extensions, documentation gaps, reliance on secondary guarantors who did not sign original agreements." He looked at Ray. "Specifically, you." Ray's face reddened. "This is ridiculous." Susan slid a thicker folder across the table. "These are the records." Melissa reached for it, then stopped. "Because Mr. Halverson withdrew before liability was triggered." Mark said, "He is no longer exposed. However, the trust must restructure immediately, or risk having the credit line frozen." Diane inhaled sharply. Melissa's mouth opened, then closed. "You're saying he just walked away?" I folded my hands. I stepped aside. Ray stared at me. "After everything we did for you," Susan answered before I could. "After everything he did for you." No one spoke. I let the silence do its work. I'd learned over the years silence makes people reveal themselves. Diane whispered, "No, that can't be." Melissa stood abruptly. "This is a setup. You planned this." "I planned not to be responsible for things I never agreed to," I said. Ray sank back in his chair, suddenly smaller. Mark closed his folder. "We'll follow up with next steps." Susan stood. "Our involvement is complete." In the hallway, Diane caught up to me. "Frank," she said, voice trembling, "what did you do?" I stopped and faced her. "I stopped paying for disrespect." She reached for my arm, then let her hand fall. I didn't look back. The drive home was quiet. Wet streets, low sky, no radio. For once, my thoughts weren't racing, just heavy and orderly. The house looked the same when I pulled in. Same wreath, same flickering porch light. But I felt the difference immediately. I wasn't carrying their weight anymore. Diane didn't come home that night. She texted instead. "I'm staying at Melissa's. We need time." I set the phone down without replying. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. There were consequences. Ray sold off assets. Melissa's spending tightened. The group chat went silent. And me. I slept. The IRS issue resolved cleanly once my name was formally removed. No drama. Just done. I started taking walks again. Slow ones. I noticed neighbors I'd lived beside for years. One afternoon, I watched a grandfather teach his grandson how to throw a football. No shouting, no rush, just patience. That word stayed with me. A month later, Diane asked to talk. We met at a diner on Maple Street. Vinyl booths. Coffee that tasted older than both of us. She looked smaller, somehow less certain. "I didn't realize how much you were carrying," she said. "I tried to tell you. I didn't listen." I told her the truth. "I'm not going back to how things were. If we move forward, it has to be different. Respect, boundaries, or not at all." She nodded. "I understand." When I got home, I took the old file box from the closet and set it on a high shelf in the garage. I didn't open it. Some records aren't kept for protection. They're kept as reminders. That Christmas dinner crossed my mind one last time, the empty plates. The laughter. The bill sliding toward me. They thought money was all I brought to the family. They forgot I was the one who kept the lights on, and when I stopped, everything finally became clear.